Good morning, St. Luke's. Good morning. Welcome this morning to our forum. I'm going to open us with prayer, and I'm going to let Winnie introduce our guest speakers this morning, and our youth will be asking questions to the panelists this morning, so it should be a great conversation. Let us pray. Almighty God, our heavenly creator, send down upon those who hold office in this city the spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice, that with steadfast purpose they may faithfully serve in their offices to promote the well-being of all people. Through Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen. That was.
What a mighty prayer book we have, right?
I know, right?
Accommodates all situations. It's like they anticipated a forum with city leaders. We are so honored to have as our, please come in if you're in the back, and I think people are looking for chairs. If you need a chair. If you've got an empty chair near you, would you raise your hand? We've got some chairs up front, as always. No one has to stand unless they want to.
Winnie, can I say one more thing? If you are on Realm, I'm going to ask you to open up your phone, click on event, and click on this event so that we know who has been here and we can take a full count. We're starting to do this regularly. So click on the event. You will have to register. Just hit register, register, register until it says you are registered. Okay.
We too are data-driven, apparently. All right, y'all. So friends, we are so honored to have with us today the president of the Atlanta City Council, Doug Shipman. And and a deputy chief, Prenzinna Spann of the Atlanta PD. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. I know you don't have to put yourself on the spot in quite this way ever, so I really appreciate it. We are a friendly audience with a lot of questions, and we're so excited that you're here. You are here because members of our congregation have been so impressed with your leadership and your vision for this city and different venues that they've heard you, that as a result, they asked if you would come and join us for our forum. So this is our Sunday school hour between two services. This is probably a pretty good representation of who we are. There are more of us, but a decent number are here, and they're usually the same number or more in bed, apparently, watching us, as you see in the room. So know that this is mirrored again online, and that people watch during the week. It's how our community does this. So let me just say a little bit about where we are right now. The reason we're going to talk about the Stitch, which is why we've invited Doug Shipman here, is the Stitch is a thing to cover the highway just south of us, which is there, I think that way. The Stitch would reconnect us from where we are at St. Luke's to First United Methodist Church and to the Basilica, where the chief of police actually is a member. Darren's a member over there. When the highway was created, an infirmary, a convent, and the parking of the Basilica were claimed to make that highway, and for First United Methodist Church, their parking lot. And as you know, a church without a parking lot is a struggle, right? This church has talked about that over the years. And so they remember that. That's a big part of their history. We were lucky to be on this side. And the Stitch would begin to put those neighborhoods back together, but we're going to hear more about that. And then you will remember, and this is what we're talking about in church as well, because today we're celebrating the feast of Absalom Jones, the first black priest in the Episcopal Church, ordained in the 1700s, for perspective, right? A long time ago. But you will remember what was going on in the country when that highway was built. That was 1962. So that era is what we're talking about also in church today. So we live with the consequences of the decisions of the civil rights era, how neighborhoods responded to that, how people responded to that. This church chose to stay in this community at that time. That was a decision that was made and is on the record. They could have gone uptown. Lots of churches did. And so we're gonna talk about all that. That's gonna work its way into our conversation today. And then we're also going to talk about policing in this moment. One of the things that I think Atlanta has had some real skill in doing with Chief Shipman is what are police for and what are they not for? right? That there are things this city needs to take responsibility for, and we do collectively, and then what can policing do, and what does good policing look like? So because there's so much to cover, and I could talk the whole time because I have some feelings about this, we have focused our morning by asking our youth to develop questions to ask, and we're so grateful for the conversation that you all have had. I have a sheet in front of me of how you've organized that. And then I think one thing, before we start, I just want to say one thing, is I want to acknowledge in this room how many parents have come to me in the last couple of weeks and said that their children have told them that they're afraid all the time, that there are guns everywhere, that they could be shot anytime. I'm going to say it to you because I know it's happening, that those are conversations in your families, it's conversation in our community, and we take it really seriously here at St. Luke's. It's devastating that this is how our children are growing up, and we want to do our part to change that. All right, so our first question, I believe, comes from Kate Burns. And yes, the microphone is right here.
Hello, my name is Kate. I go to Maynard Jackson High School. I have two questions. They're kind of related. So how do you think the stitch is going to help repair the harm that's been done to Black neighborhoods and businesses that were destroyed when the connector was built? And how are you going to involve the communities who are most directly affected by the stitch in your prep and planning?
So I can start, Chief, around the stitch. Let me just start by saying good morning. It's an honor to be here. I was actually in this room about 3 weeks ago when the unsheltered count kicked off from here. It's one of the many examples, as you know, of this congregation being deeply involved in the community, so thank you for that. As Winnie referenced, the stitch was part of the national moment in which federal highway dollars were used to bisect Black communities or cut off Black communities from downtowns. It was put in the place that it was placed for a reason. It was intentional, and it was destructive, not only for Buttermilk Bottom, which of course is where we sit, but also for Auburn Avenue, but also for downtown. So this is a redress of that moment. It is trying to say that was wrong, and we want to, in some ways, undo what was done. It's symbolic, right? It's an important symbol of having one community and not two communities, not having downtown in one place and now it is Fourth Ward in another place, right? So I think the symbolism matters, and we're seeing this across the country. We have seen other moments and other efforts like this, such as Dallas, right? Dallas has capped over their connector. They've put in a green space, but also in Dallas, it's the cultural district. So the art museum is there and the opera house is there. So I think it creates an opportunity for us to make a new place, which would be also very helpful, as you said, for Black businesses, because there are many Black businesses that still exist on Auburn Avenue, and many of the congregations along Auburn still own the property that's undeveloped. So there's a huge opportunity when you start to connect these communities together. I'll give you one example. Some of you know I'm a big runner. I live in Fourth Ward, just down Freedom Path. So I often run up right over where the stitch will be. And I happen to be running one of the days of Dragon Con, the big festival, as you know, Dragon Con. And for the first time ever, there were about 40 people one afternoon walking from downtown towards Fourth Ward. I don't know if they were staying there, they were going to the Beltline, but it was the first time I'd ever seen people sort of migrating that direction. And I think it's an example of what's going to happen. It's an opportunity basically to create a centerpiece by which the new Civic Center development, what is happening in South Midtown, what's happening in downtown, and what's happening in Fourth Ward can all be put back together. And because Auburn Avenue still has such a number of Black-owned businesses and Black-owned properties, that actually creates an opportunity for a renaissance. So I think it really is incredible. Now, how to involve communities, this one is actually pretty helpful in that Central Atlanta Progress is driving this effort. And because Central Atlanta Progress is driving the effort and not a developer, it creates an opportunity to engage with communities. And Central Atlanta Progress has done many things that are community-oriented, including, some of you know, I led the effort to build the Center for Civil and Human Rights. That started at Central Atlanta Progress. It actually was birthed at Central Atlanta Progress. So because it is coming out of a nonprofit and not a developer, it actually will have the ability to have community forums, to have advisory councils, to have the ability to really shape the project. And frankly, let me just say on the record, I think this is going to happen. The city has put $10 million towards it. 2 federal grants have happened. The engineering is quite far along. I think that this actually will occur.
Chief Spann, do you want to comment? You don't have to.
Well, I mean, I think, excuse me, I think Doug did an excellent job. I think he covered all bases on that question.
Can I ask one little,
Sure.
when do you think it might happen?
So I think that we're sitting in 2023. There's probably a year and a half or so to get to actual constructible documents. I mean, it is an engineering, issue to put a cap over a active highway, and not only the engineering around it, but how are you going to do it so you don't have to stop traffic, right? We don't want that. And then I think you're probably 5 years from that. So I would expect probably 27, 28 would be my guess of when you probably are going to, maybe closer to 30, but I think it's sort of in that time frame. And then it is a mix. The plans that I've seen are a mix of development and park space, so I think it's going to do several things. But let me just say one other thing. Between Civic Center, the Gulch, South Downtown, you have about 5,000 residences that are going to be built within the next half decade, basically kind of on all sides of where we're sitting. That will be transformative for downtown, right? We haven't had that kind of residential presence in downtown for a long time. And so I think something like the Stitch is going to feel very active because you're going to have a lot of residents living around it.
Yeah, it's an exciting time in this community.
It is.
I think our next question is from Asher.
Hi, my name is Asher, and I go to David T. Howard, and I'm here to ask you 2 questions. Why is so much gun violence happening? And also, what are you doing to counteract this serious problem?
Thank you, Asher.
Hey, I think I can take that question.
Let you start.
Well, okay. So, Asher, there's a lot of gun violence. Everybody does have access to a lot of guns. And as you all see, one of the number one problems in our community is car break-ins. In every other car, there's a gun left in the car. And this puts the guns in the hands of people that should not have it and clearly did not legally purchase them and go through any background checks. In addition to that, I would say right before COVID started, there started to be a decline in communication, effective communication. And so everyone's conflict resolution skills have diminished tremendously. And especially, unfortunately, with our youth, we're seeing a lot of the first resort is for them to automatically go to the guns. A lot of older people here know about fights in school, and we used to use fists. And unfortunately, that is just not on the table anymore, and neither is communication. So what we're doing to combat that issue is the Atlanta Police Department is committed every day to going out and seizing guns. Just last year, we had at least 2,000 guns seized from the hands of different criminals, some who had different criminal records, some were youth. We had the buyback program last year, and we're committed to make sure we do the same this year, and I'm hopeful that we will surpass that number of seizing those guns and taking them off the street.
Chief, could you just also touch on, Chief Schierbaum often talks about guns, drugs, and gangs.
Yes.
Could you just also talk about that as related to the gun violence issue?
And so that is Chief Schierbaum, and unfortunately he could not be here today because he had an emergency, but hopefully I do just as good of a job as he is. But those are his 3 commitments to make sure that we address those issues in our community, to address the drug issues, be committed to removing the guns off the street, and ultimately that will reduce the violence that we're seeing.
Let me just add a couple of points, if I may. First of all, let me just say how incredible it is to have young people forming these questions and asking these questions. If you didn't have any hope coming in here, you got hope coming out of here because of that, so thank you. Of the murders that were committed last year, the vast majority of them were either people who knew each other or they were conflicts, to the chief's point. Instead of somebody having a fist fight, basically somebody got a gun and basically decided to shoot another person. The randomness that we think of, kind of the random acts of violence, are actually very few. Now, we often hear about them, and they're horrible. But actually, most of what's happening are one of these two things. There's a conflict that comes out of control, people who know each other. So one of the things that we need to do is to the chief's point, we need to give people more tools, especially young people, more tools around conflict resolution, right? And so this is, there's a whole series of things that the mayor and the council are working on from birth basically all the way through post-college. So the city has committed $20 million for the first time in its history to early child care funding. And this will basically make it more affordable for there to be early child care for any citizen in this community. Because we know if you don't have good development from 0 to 5, when you hit kindergarten, you're already behind. So we want to make sure every kid is ready to go to school. We've put a lot of resources into after-school programs, summer programs, internship programs as kids get older, because you want to fill time, right? You want to fill time with something that's productive instead of something else. In fact, I was just down at Young Middle School the other day. Big Brothers Big Sisters has innovated for 100 years or more. They've only done one-to-one mentoring, right? You get a big brother, you get a big sister, and little brother, little sister. They've gone to a paid mentor for multiple students at Young Middle School. Once a week, every sixth grader at Young Middle School meets with a mentor every week. And they talk about all kinds of things in their life. Attendance has gone up, violence has gone down. These are the kinds of interventions, public-private partnerships, to make sure that we're giving young people the tools to resolve their conflicts. Because I think that would actually diminish, both would increase how people feel to the point about feeling fear, but it'll also decrease the violence that we see, and then combined with, and I think the chief is right, you see a lot of drug-related, a lot of gang-related activity. These are organized crime elements. If you can lower those in your community, you can lower the violence as well.
Thank you.
I would add to that too, with the Police Athletic League. We do intend to expand that, of course. We already work with our youth, but of course we're not going to stop. In addition to that, we have the At Promise Centers, which we've been able to work with our nonprofit partners and open up at least 3 At Promise Centers in the city. And so we're committed to continuing doing our part and to making sure the youth have additional resources in addition to working with the mayor's office as well.
And just so you know, an At Promise Center is basically like a YMCA, but it is for young people who have started to become involved in the judicial system. So they are kind of on the front end of becoming in trouble with the law, and it is trying to basically divert them from continuing on that pattern into something that's healthier.
Thank you.
Yes.
Henry has our next question.
Hi, my name is Henry, and my question is pretty similar to Asher's. It's how do mental health and homelessness tie into the issues of gun violence in our communities?
That's a great question. So thank you. I don't see the homeless portion being an issue as much as at times the mental health issues being a portion or definitely a challenge that we face. One of the things the Atlanta Police Department, if you all saw in the news last year, we had several incidents involving people, and this is just nationwide, not just limited to Atlanta or the state of Georgia, but we've had several situations where people have been challenged with their mental health crisis, and unfortunately, because the resources may not have been in place, they may have acted in a way that we've seen turn out to be detriment to not only them, but to their families. And so with that, Atlanta Police Department is committed to, we have the crisis intervention training, which there's only 2 agencies in the state of Georgia that requires their recruits to actually go through a crisis intervention training so that when they get out on the streets, they actually know how to handle such calls. In addition to that, let me go back to answer your question. I definitely think that the mental health issue is definitely a challenge that we see time and time again. But the only way that we can really combat that is to make sure our police officers have the training that they need to go out and to really know how to assist. Now, we do work with our nonprofit partners. It used to be Mercy Mobile. I think they're still available. And you know, I've been working with you since I was an officer, working with Downtown Improvement District and working with ambassadors. Even ambassadors has hired a social worker and someone that can go out and assist various individuals. So I really think the key to this is really making sure we have a well-trained officer. And a well-trained officer definitely can allow us to de-escalate some of these situations that we may see. But that definitely is a challenge. Doug, you want to chime in?
Yeah, just related to that, the pre-arrest diversion program, PAD, that some of you have seen, the vans driving around, that program, actually, we doubled the funding for that program to extend their hours. So PAD actually now is available to citizens to call 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. But it's available for our APD officers to call 24/7. So they can call a pre-arrest diversion van and say, I have somebody here who I think has a mental health issue or who's facing homelessness. And basically, instead of the officer only having two choices historically, take them to Grady or take them to jail, those have been the only two choices we've had. Basically, pre-arrest diversion can offer other resources. Can we take you to a shelter? Can we take you to someplace else? And remember, the city is also going to take at least one and probably two floors of the city jail and convert it into a wraparound services diversion center. So we will now have a third option when that opens. Instead of just Grady or jail, we'll have a place that APD officers can take somebody in crisis with wraparound services to allow them to basically get the care that they need. And so I think that this will, generally speaking, it may or may not, to your point, I'm not sure homelessness and gun violence are that related, but certainly from a community aspect, I think this will serve folks who are in crisis much better than saying we're either going to dump you at the ER or we're going to take you to jail. What they really need is mental health services. What they really need are other wraparound services. But let me just make the plug I always make. Remember that mental health funding is not the city's responsibility. It is the county and the state. We've seen good moves at the state around mental health funding, but it is still far short, both in the city and in the state, for what we need. We don't even have enough providers to care for those who are in need of mental health services right now. We need to continue to have more funding from the state and the county around these issues.
And I will say, if you don't mind me adding, definitely Fulton County has been a decent partner to us. We have been able, I don't know how many of you are familiar with a young lady who used to lay in the streets in her own feces. At times, she would lay there for weeks and weeks on end. Unfortunately, she's since passed, but the Fulton County mental health department came out and actually assisted APD with that. We recognize that we can't arrest our way out of this. I mean, it's just not an arrestable thing to do. And so when we would take her, of course, we would try to offer her services. Because she has the mental health issues and she's hearing different voices, no, she did not want our assistance. And so, of course, our hands were tied. There was not very much that we could do. But with the county's assistance, again, that community relationship, that nonprofit partner relationship, we were able to get her the services that she needed. And so, again, unfortunately, just because of other health issues, she's since passed. But that was a great example of the partnerships that we can have and the success stories that we see from that.
Thank you. Our next question is from Garen.
Hi, my name is Garen. I go to Druid Hills. So we were wondering, why do you think Atlanta needs a larger training facility for officers, commonly known as Cop City, and why is this necessary?
I can start off.
Sure. I get asked this a lot too, so.
So first, let me just explain, we currently don't have a training facility right now. And we are actually renting a space at Atlanta Metropolitan College. Our partners who are going to share this new facility with us, the fire department, they rent spaces in Douglasville. And so several times throughout the year, if there's different classes that we need to have or house or whatever we need to do, we have to spend money on different facilities at times just to make sure we have the ample space that we need to have those particular trainings there. Now, it would not be larger than what we already have. And let me just go back and say the building that we moved out of was just so deplorable. There is not one person in here that would be comfortable sitting in there for 8 hours a day. There's just no way. You would not even be comfortable to sit a donut on the table. There would be several friends who would meet you there before you could even grab a napkin to get you a donut out of the box. So needless to say, it's definitely something that's needed. We definitely, the space that we're looking at is equivalent to a high school space. It's only 70 square feet. When you look at other police departments, they have at least, New York, for example, 750,000 square feet. That's pretty big. And then you compare other agencies throughout various states who have large facilities where they can train. Now this, unfortunately, it would not, our newest facility would not have all of the things that these different police departments have nationwide, but at least it would be a start to make officers feel better about the places that they're trained, have recruits, great morale for recruits to be able to learn new things. And then who doesn't want a well-trained officer on the streets? I would rather have an officer, thank you. I would rather have an officer on the streets that's very trained when they come to my house, who I'm also a resident of Zone 4. But I want them to be trained. I want, when my family comes to the city of Atlanta, for them to be greeted appropriately, for them to be trained appropriately, so that we don't see the things that we see on the news that, you know, that happen at various agencies. So for those reasons, that's why we definitely need a new facility.
Let me just add a couple of things. I think it's important to understand what we're asking APD to do and our fire and rescue. So driving a fire truck is not an easy thing, right? Do you know where fire truck training takes place right now? In Walmart parking lots, in Best Buy parking lots, because we don't have an obstacle course, we don't have a place for them to learn to drive, right? Or they have to go an hour or more south. They have to take the trucks in the middle of the night to go down in these open spaces in order to learn to train. One of the reasons you need a lot of footprint is because it's not just the building that's being built, but you need a place to learn how to drive. And then there's also a city, mock city, that basically you can do bomb demolition, you can do hostage training. And remember what we're asking APD to do. We're a 500,000 person city in the middle of a 7 million metro place. Every day we swell to 1 million to 1.5 million people, right? So we're asking our police force to serve not only the residents, but we're asking the police force to serve the visitors and to do things like Super Bowls and World Cups and maybe the Democratic National Convention, which are very, very high profile, high target kinds of situations that APD needs specialized training to do. And so we're asking a lot of our APD forces, and just to put a fine point on it, there's mold in the buildings that we have right now. There are rats in the buildings that we have right now. There are pipes that don't work in the buildings that we have right now. And we're asking our officers to protect us. We need to be providing our officers with the ability to do their job. Now, that said, I have said the same thing since I campaigned for this job. We need to make sure the environmental impact of where we build is appropriate. We need to make sure that we are leaving the overall environment at least the same, if not better. And I think that we've taken a good step between what CEO Thurman and the mayor signed a couple of weeks ago. I think that there's more to do so that we actually have a lessening of the environmental impact of the facility. But the facility is dire. It is a dire situation around training for our officers and our fire forces, and I think that it would be a dereliction of duty if we did not provide them the spaces to train.
Thank you, Karen. Our next question is from Sylvie.
My name is Sylvie, and my question is, what is the hardest thing you ever had to do in your job, and how did you know it was the right thing to do?
Go ahead.
All right, Sylvie, you got me on this one. So I would say I've had the pleasure of working in several specialized units. And I think one of the hardest things for me was when I was initially assigned to internal affairs. So internal affairs is a unit where you have to police the police. Yeah. So I think when I first got there, I really didn't understand why certain people would just make the decision not to work within the guidelines that are provided for them. Day one, the oath that they took to serve the community in this great city, why would they not follow policy? And so this could be something as simple as, Sylvia, you asked for a police report because somebody stole your book bag. And I would go in the system and look for this report, and guess what? It wasn't there. Why was that? And so I had to learn that, yes, it was a ding on this officer's record, but at the same time, it wasn't okay because you were still standing by waiting for your report for your book bag, right? So you can go and buy a pretty new one. So what would happen with this is you would do a whole investigation on these particular officers, but this is a violation of one of our work rules. You have to do the report that's required of you in a timely manner. And when it wasn't done, they would be issued whatever this discipline is. It could be an oral admonishment, a written reprimand. It could be a suspension day. Depends on his or her disciplinary history. So saying all that to say, if it's not okay for me, if it's not okay that, I wouldn't do that to anybody, then it shouldn't be okay for somebody else to get away with it. So I think that was one of the hardest things to know, for instance, somebody that I joined the police department with, and not understanding why they would not work within the work rules or policies that have been set for us. And so, of course, I use a minimal example, but this can go all the way up to someone going to jail for violating the oath that they took. So I think for me, that's probably one of the hardest things that I've done, but at the same time, reasonably, you can see why it needs to be done. And so over time, because I went back for two terms there, it wasn't easy because it's not okay. It's never okay for anybody to be or think that they are above the law, above the policy, or anything else. So that was my answer.
I think for me, my office or myself, I get contacted a lot when people have very tough problems. Their landlord is not, responding to them. They have something has happened with their child, and the perpetrator is in the court system. These types of things. Someone's experiencing homelessness, and often I can't help because it's a county issue, it's a state issue. They don't actually live in Atlanta. Twice as many people think they live in Atlanta than actually live in the city of Atlanta, right? There's a lot of just across the street. You just live right outside the city. And it's very, very hard to go home knowing that you would like to help this person and they desperately need help, but you have to pass them to somebody else. Now, you try to connect them to the service, you try to connect them to somebody else, but you can't actually take responsibility for that issue. And that is heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking for me as somebody who comes into this work trying to fix things, trying to do things, trying to make things happen. And I think that that's very, very difficult. And so, government is a complicated thing, and there are jurisdictional lines, and trying to educate people on how to go about doing something and getting things done, but knowing that you can't help them yourself is very, very hard. But to me, it's important to be very honest with people. I mean, I could say, yeah, I'll help you, knowing that I can't, right? I could say, yeah, I'll get on that and never call them back. But that would be wrong. That would be false hope, and that's not what I'm there to do. And so I think it's very hard to try to steer people to the right places knowing that you can't fix it yourself.
Thank you, Sylvie. Delvin has our next question.
Hi, my name is Delvin. I go to David T. Howard Middle School. And my first question is, how does your administration plan to respond to the mayor's design of 2023 as the Year of the Youth?
As the Year of the Youth? I can start with that if you want me to, Chief. So the Year of the Youth is an approach by the mayor's office and the mayor to basically make 2023 a real focus on youth. And he has said that he wants Atlanta to be the best place to raise a child and raise a family. This is a really fundamental shift from what we've done, I think, in Atlanta before. We've often couched our success in economic development, how many companies do we have, how many jobs have we been created. But we really haven't focused as a city on youth-oriented types of activities. So I think it starts with what I talked about, the $20 million for early childhood education. It's summer internships. It's making sure that all of our parks and rec facilities are well-funded and open, that they are accessible, right? That pools are open during the summer, that they're well-staffed. We've got to make sure that all of those recreation facilities have programs. Midnight basketball is one that a lot of people have heard about. Basically, it doesn't take place at midnight. Literally, it takes place at 7 p.m. But it's basically evening basketball at different recreational facilities around the city. But it's making sure that all of those things are funded, but even more so that the public knows about them, that families know that something is happening down the street, something is happening at that recreation center, so they can actually plug it into their calendar, they can plug it into their daily life, so that we start to build the, hey, I'm going to go to the city's parks website and see what's happening because I know that something's going to be happening for my 10-year-old, for my 12-year-old, for my 18-year-old, for my 6-year-old. And then I think more broadly, it's about making sure the philanthropic community understands that this is a focus. Now, the philanthropic community has done great work around youth services, but a coordinated effort to say, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to actually augment APS. If you think about APS, right, APS has your attention from 8-ish to 3-ish, but you're awake more than 8-ish to 3-ish, right? And weekends. So how do we as a city bring all kinds of opportunities for our youth around those other hours? How do we create opportunities for families around those other hours so that throughout a young person's life, they are getting opportunities, they are progressing, and that this is a place that families say, I want to be here. Look, at the end of the day, Atlanta success depends on our ability to retain people who want to live here, right? We have to make it a place that they want to stay when they have kids, when their kids are teenagers, after their kids are gone, because we're competing against other cities for people. And to me, this is one of the big things that we have to do. We have to make it family friendly in order for people to say, yeah, I want to stay.
I would just add to that in addition to our police athletic league and the At Promise centers, we also have our community-oriented policing section. And they do go out to the schools. They do have, they go out and they do different activities with the school as well. And so after hours, a lot of times you'll see our cops unit playing football at the different rec centers. And this is outside of our police athletic league. But we continue and we work hard to really work with our nonprofit partners. And then that's when you all come in as well. To make sure that we have that partnership with the community, if you all know of any programs that we can put our youth in, then we encourage you to make sure you let us know, guide us to the right direction, and of course, we'll be there to support with whatever you may need in addition to that. But I think it's really important that we zero in on that community partnership because we can't do this alone. And so we know that, specifically speaking with the water boy situation, and we saw that time and time again. We worked with Chris 180 to try to make sure Chris 180 was providing resources to not only the youth who were selling water, but to their families, those who may have needed assistance, those parents that may have needed a job, to make sure that they had those necessary resources that they needed. And so with that said, again, just making sure that we get with the community, making sure that we work with the Mayor's Youth Initiative. I know that they are gearing up right now to work on some different programs for the youth for this summer. And they have the website. I can't remember what it was, Doug.
It's yeartheyouth.com.
Okay, there you go, yeartheyouth.com. And if you do know of any programs, feel free to put that in there, anyone that's willing to work with the city on that.
I have one more question.
Okay.
How do you plan to keep the Stitch a safe place?
How do you make the Stitch a safe place?
How do you keep it a safe
How do you keep it a safe place?
Thank you,
So I'll take the non-public safety answer,
Okay.
then the chief can talk about public safety. The number one way to keep any place safe is to make sure that it's well lit, it's clean, and it's got a lot of people in it, right? People lead to safety. Anybody been on the Beltline lately? Yes, sir. Right? It's safe because there's tons of people out there, right? So we need to, in the design of the Stitch, make sure that it's well lit, it's welcoming, it's got lots of different ways in and out of it so that it is a place that people want to be, and that we have a maintenance plan to make it clean and to make it, attractive so that people keep coming. If you do those things, if you make it that kind of place, it has a really good chance of kind of being a self-enforcing safe place because people will want to use it. And I think that starts with the design itself.
And I think too, just again, with the community partnership, of course, you all heard the saying, if you see something, say something. I think that that's definitely the first start of keeping the Stitch safe. But then in addition to that, the mayor is also very committed to making sure that our police force is expanding over time. And so I know that we were committed to hiring 250 officers. We were very close to that for the end of last year, but we're committed every year to making sure that we expand the officers. We have a class that will be graduating the academy every other month this year. And so we are looking forward to growing the force with all of the new residents we have, in addition to all of the new projects that are coming into our space. And so I think that's just a small piece of keeping it safe, but for sure, that community involvement is always very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delvin. Well, those were the questions, and the
Great
people
questions.
that signed up to ask them. They're wonderful. Can you help me thank the youth and Nicole Lambolet? Now, church starts at 11:15, but I got to ask one question, because people are thinking it. So let me just say the thing. So we all saw that horrible video of that young man that died in Memphis. And you've talked about being on the unit that had to deal with police misconduct. Tell us about, and we've got plenty of folks here who've talked about encounters that, historically in their lives. Tell us about feeling safe.
So I would say, unfortunately, what we saw that took place in Memphis, of course, was very disheartening. And what happened is they broke the trust of so many people, not just in Memphis, but nationwide. And so it's always hard to put a Band-Aid on something like that after seeing it. But I think the police department has a duty to make sure that every call that we go on to start to rebuild that trust. And it starts here, right? Just the conversations that we're having today. And so I would say to feel safe, there's nothing wrong with calling internal affairs when you see an officer who you may think is acting out of the ordinary, or he did something that you just think, no, this is not right. Of course, you have Major Schiffbauer here. He's the major of Zone 5. Feel free to call him, his captain, his supervisors, any supervisor. But feel free to talk about and discuss what you see those officers' actions being if you're not pleased with that. In addition to that, we have the Citizens Review Board. That is not police, not run by police, but we have a great relationship with them. They can take complaints. They will be investigated. And in addition to just being investigated with the Citizens Review Board, they can also be investigated by us simultaneously at the same time. And so that is something that we take very seriously. And I honestly can say with the Atlanta Police Department, and not just the situation in Memphis, but even going back to the situation in Ferguson, there was just so much stuff that was unheard of that these police departments could actually get away with. Yeah. And I would say the Atlanta Police Department is unique. And don't get me wrong, we're all human. I'm not saying that, we're perfect, because we all have room to grow. But the Atlanta Police Department is an accredited agency. And we are accredited through CALEA standards. Out of 18,000 police departments, there's probably only 800 in the United States that are accredited through the CALEA standards. And what CALEA standards does is it makes sure that we are, working within the 21st century policing. We're making sure that we give the citizens and community a voice to be heard, just like I said about making the complaints on the officers if you so choose to. The great thing we have going for us is, of course, the body-worn camera. It tells the story of exactly what happened. We're a very transparent police department. In addition to that, the CALEA standards ensures that we are constantly educating our officers, whether it be through civil rights training, whether it be through sensitivity training, our LGBTQ training. These are things that other agencies just don't do. And so we want to make sure that we're dotting I's and crossing T's when it comes to that. And I know still, you know, sometimes when you look at the media, there's the norm, and then you're fighting a fight that the media, the story that they're putting out. And so a lot of times, even with members of my family, there's a lot of times people don't feel safe based on what they see in the media alone. It's not necessarily anybody in my family's story, but because they saw this on the media, they think that the same thing can happen to them, right? And so I think it's very important. Don't be afraid to talk to an officer. An officer is just like you with different training. They put on their pants, shirts, all of it the same way you do every single day, but they stood up to take an oath and they declared that they would be different, and they are here to protect, be heroes. And so we want to make sure that our officers are constitutional, that they're compassionate, that they police equitably, and of course ethically. So I think, again, don't be afraid to have those conversations with the officers as well as supervisors.
Just a couple of other things that are related. When I came in a year ago into office, 911 and the amount of wait time when you called 911 was a huge issue. I heard it from residents all over the city. We've made a major technological upgrade to 911 to basically prioritize the most important calls and to allow that system to work much better. The wait times have gone down. We've also expanded the number of 911 operators we have. We've increased their pay so that when you have a situation, you could have confidence that if you call 911, you're going to get through, you're going to get somebody to respond appropriately. I think that's part of feeling safe. For the first time ever, we've funded a take-home car program so that officers now can take cars home with them. So why does that matter? One, it means that even when they're driving to and from their shift, you're going to see a police car driving, which means you're going to see more visibility, which makes people feel safe. You're going to see a car in somebody's driveway, that makes you feel safe. It also is a huge retention tool for our officers. So officers love that program, and if you retain officers, it's much better than the churn of trying to hire more officers. We are increasing our programs around having officers live in the city. I love that you live in Zone 4. We need more of our officers living in our communities, because fundamentally breakdowns happen when someone doesn't see another person as a neighbor, right? They see them as someone to fear. And so by having officers live in our communities, we can have that relationship be closer. And finally, I'd say, you know, the Center for Civil and Human Rights actually has a program where APD recruits go through the Center for Civil and Human Rights to talk about not only the legacy of civil rights, but contemporary human rights. And this is a program, it's not only training APD officers, it's training police departments around the country. Because fundamentally what we know is that the worst atrocities in history happen when we dehumanize each other. When we see someone else not as human or not as fully human, we can start to do horrible things to others. And so that fundamental kernel of every person is a human. They may be in crisis, they may be acting in a way that is very, very destructive, but they're still human. Making sure that that happens in every officer's mind, in every person's mind, I think can give people faith and hope that we can have a better outcome than what we saw in Memphis, which was awful.
Will you help me thank our guests for being with us this morning?